It's not often that the Western and horror genres combine, but when they do, they often result in some pretty awesome mashups. So today, let's take a look at 10 of the very best horror Western movies that you can watch right now. So first up at number 10, we have 2020's The Pale Door, a relatively new horror Western that's essentially 3:10 to Yuma meets The Descent. As such, The Pale Door follows two brothers and their gang who unwittingly free a captive woman during a failed train robbery, and reluctantly agree to escort her home in hope of a reward. But little do they know that they're actually being led into a trap, in a ghost town occupied by a coven of bloodthirsty witches, forcing the unsuspecting outlaws to fight for their lives. Now, as cool as this concept sounds, it's important to note that this isn't a big budget movie with a star-studded cast, yet despite this, The Pale Door boasts some pretty amazing practical effects and creepy cinematography. But all of this comes into play a lot more towards the end of the movie, so don't be put off by its slow start, as it really does pick up, and overall, it's worth a watch. So at number 9 we have Ghosts of the Ozarks, a 2021 independent horror western starring the likes of David Arquette and Tim Blake Nelson. And much like The Pale Door, the movie is set in a remote town with a dark secret, following a young doctor who's summoned by his uncle to the Ozark Mountains in 1866 with the promise of a better life. And at first, the fortress town that he arrives in seems like a utopia, but it soon becomes clear that the locals are harbouring a sinister secret and are being haunted by a supernatural presence that will kill anybody that ventures outside at night. So again, a really ambitious concept that the film does struggle to actualise at times given its limited budget. However, Ghosts of the Ozarks really succeeds in building an uneasy atmosphere around a really intriguing narrative hook and multiple standout performances, a lot like The Wicker Man and The Village. So if you're a fan of those movies, you should enjoy this one. At number 8, we have Oregon Trail, another relatively new horror western that actually released earlier this year. And despite its title, the film isn't an adaptation of the Oregon Trail video game, but does follow a pioneering family in 1870s Montana who is set upon by a group of murderous bandits. And following the brutal attack, sole survivor Abigail is left to harsh the wilderness alone, as she attempts to escape her attackers with her family horse and the allies that she's made along the way. Now, unlike the previous entries, the horror element of Oregon Trail comes less from its supernatural scares and more from its bloody violence, which obviously isn't for everyone. But overall, Oregon Trail is still a decent horror western that's worth checking out. So at number 7, we have 2004's Dead Birds, a horror western with a really impressive cast that includes Michael Shannon and Henry Thomas. And the film follows a crew of ex-Confederate soldiers that take refuge in an abandoned plantation after a bank robbery, but soon become aware that they're not alone as supernatural encounters ensue. So Dead Birds is very much a jump scare heavy haunted house movie with a period setting that's still surprisingly effective despite some dated CGI. But the cast and cinematography are consistently good throughout, and more than any of the other entries on this list so far, Dead Birds is probably the best example of a horror western that perfectly balances the two genres in a way that complements them both. At number 6, we have 2018's The Wind, an independent horror western starring Caitlin Gerard. Now, the film is set in the late 19th century and follows Lizzie, a wife living in solitude with her husband until another couple move in next door, seemingly awakening a demonic entity that may or may not be a product of Lizzie's idle mind. So The Wind is very much one of those films where the atmosphere is everything, featuring very little dialogue or context, forcing you as the viewer to piece things together, much like The Witch. Now that means the movie won't be for everyone, but even so, The Wind features some really creepy moments and slowly builds to an explosive finale that does offer answers, but is open-ended enough that it lets you draw your own conclusions about what's really going on. So if you're looking for a more story-focused horror western, The Wind might be the one for you. Next, at number 5, we have The Burrowers from 2008, directed by J.T. Petty, who's since become a famous video game writer for horror games like Outlast and The Walking Dead. So as you might expect, the movie really delivers in its horror elements, revolving around a posse of rescuers seeking to save a kidnapped settler from hostile Native Americans. However, it turns out that the real kidnappers are a horrifying species of man-eaters that live underground. So it's kind of like Aliens meets The Searchers, and was actually likened to a Terrence Malick film upon its release, given that the plot is not so much about the monsters featured as it is about the dark truths that they reveal about the characters who are hunting them. Now that's not to say the movie doesn't have its issues, feeling a bit dated and slow at times, but the film is definitely a hidden gem of a horror western that's certainly worth a watch. So at number 4 we have 1973's Westworld starring Yul Brynner. Now obviously Westworld is a science fiction western first and foremost, but the movie certainly has its fair share of horror elements and motifs as well. And this is all due to its central concept of a futuristic Wild West theme park that becomes overrun by its android workers, who suddenly develop a mind of their own and turn on their human guests. Now these ideas of technology going awry and the blurred lines between man and machine were genuinely chilling upon its release in the 70s, but even more so now all these years later, making Westworld the source of countless parodies as well as a big budget TV show. But none of this would have come to pass without the original movie, which featured an unnerving appearance from Brynner as the gunslinger and masterful direction from Michael Crichton, who managed to convert multiple thought-provoking themes and concepts into a suspense-filled fight for survival that I feel really deserves a spot amongst the best horror westerns of all time. So next up we have Ravenous, a 1999 horror western starring Guy Pearce and Robert Carlyle. And if you've never heard of it, the film is set in 1840s California and follows Captain John Boyd, who leaves a remote army outpost to investigate reports of cannibals in the surrounding area, where he encounters a deadly and deceptive foe who threatens his life and challenges his sanity. Now I won't say any more than that so as not to spoil it, but to be honest, Ravenous is a pretty difficult film to summarise anyway, as it dabbles in all sorts of genres and themes all at once, and as a result has become a cult classic in recent years, despite being a box office bomb upon its release. However, as far as horror westerns go, Ravenous is easily up there as one of the most bloody and innovative, and is a movie you're not likely to forget, regardless of whether you actually enjoy it or not. At number 2 we have Brimstone, a 2016 Dutch-American western horror, again starring Guy Pearce, as well as Kit Harington and Dakota Fanning. And much like Memento, the story is told completely out of order, across 4 separate acts, and follows a frontier woman who becomes a fugitive when she's wrongly accused of a crime that she didn't commit, while being hunted by a vengeful and sinister preacher. But similar to Ravenous, Brimstone is a pretty divisive movie, in that you'll either love it or hate it, depending largely on how much you like non-linear plots and your tolerance for brutality. Either way, Brimstone is an uneasy and bleak watch, but entirely by design, so as to get under your skin and force an extreme reaction about the movie either way. So in that sense, it's probably one of the most effective horror westerns around. So finally, at number 1 we have Bone Tomahawk, a 2015 horror western starring Kurt Russell. And here he plays Franklin, an unflappable sheriff in the 1890s who teams up with his elderly deputy and a cocky gunslinger to help a devoted husband retrieve his kidnapped wife from a group of cannibalistic cave dwellers. Now admittedly, that concept does make the film sound like a schlocky B-movie, but surprisingly, Bone Tomahawk plays it straight the whole way, offering up a host of grounded, believable characters, genuine stakes, and very real consequences. Quite frankly, given its limited budget, Bone Tomahawk is one of those movies that somehow over-delivers on every level of its production, while faithfully paying homage to the 2 genres that it inhabits, working as both an excellent western and an unforgettable horror film at the same time. So for now, Bone Tomahawk easily takes the top spot as the best horror western of all time. But go ahead and let me know your western horror recommendations below, and before you go, you might also want to check out this video right here.